Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Ellen Block, an independent international tax consultant. I'm also proud to serve as a member of CMC's Board of Trustees, including being the chair of CMC's Finance Committee. For those of you joining us by live stream, we're coming to you from our home in Columbus's historic Italian village, the Ellis. If you scan the QR codes on your tables, you'll see the many organizations that support your not-for-profit Columbus Metropolitan Club. Let's thank the sponsor of today's forum, Kroger, and our host, the Ellis. We're also grateful to the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and our live stream partner, the Columbus Dispatch. Yes, every CMC forum takes a village. Let's thank everyone supporting today's forum. Central Ohio is a rapidly growing community generating a lion's share of Ohio's overall economic vitality. Despite our region's affluence and prosperity, more than 1 in 10 Columbus families are locked in a multi-generational cycle of poverty. Today, we'll hear from passionate leaders how we can break the multi-generational cycle of poverty in Central Ohio and the critical resources that can help our neighbors escape the poverty cycle forever. To introduce our panelists, please welcome Melissa Stymack, Vice President of Operations with today's sponsor, Kroger. Melissa, the podium is yours.
Maybe I can get this. All right, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here today. The Kroger Company is proud of our role in Central Ohio and with more than 50 stores in our local communities. Our responsibility to those communities is great because our goal is to ensure fresh food is available for everyone. As Central Ohio continues to grow, we know that there are entirely too many families struggling and going hungry. 1 in 10 Columbus families are locked in poverty. Hunger plays a major role in that. 1 in every 8 Ohioans go hungry, including 1 in every 7 children. Our Kroger associates work every day to help lift families out of hunger and often out of poverty through our Zero Hunger, Zero Waste mission. That's our ambitious goal to end hunger and waste in the communities in which we serve. Locally, in 2023, Kroger donated more than 3.5 million pounds of food in dollars toward ending hunger. Our community is fortunate to have so many dedicated organizations and individuals working together to end hunger and lift families out of poverty. We're making progress, but we all know that there's so much more to do. Our team here today is excited to learn from everyone here and these amazing experts about what we can do to make sure everyone can share in the great progress and be part of the bright future ahead for Central Ohio. And now, please welcome today's esteemed panelists. First off, we have Tony Collins, CEO and President of the YMCA of Central Ohio, Lawrence Funderburke, founder and president of the Funderburke Institute of Financial Empowerment, a special lady to me because I'm part of her board, an amazing leader, Stephanie Hightower, president and CEO of the Columbus Urban League.
She's my boss, don't get it twisted.
And finally, Karen Mozenter, CEO of Jewish Family Services. And our host today, Tonisha Johnson, Emmy award-winning journalist and anchor with Spectrum News 1. Tonisha, the podium is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody. All right. Been looking forward to this conversation on today. Again, everybody, welcome. So glad that you are all here. This is a topic that is definitely near and dear to me. But for anybody that has ever lived in poverty, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, out of it can be tough. And not just out of it for the moment, but for good, especially when they're working multiple jobs, physically drained, emotionally spent, and it's still not enough to get by. Or when the constant concern is, I don't have enough to feed my kids, or I don't have enough to pay the rent. And then I'm in a position where I either am out on the street or I have to couch surf. All of that, when you think about that, is hard. But regardless of the situation, when we start to think about that struggle and whether it's over a 2-year period of time and it's chronic, or maybe it's just a specific moment in time in that 2-year span, there is a great impact on the lives of those families, and it touches so many aspects of their lives. And so with that in mind, hence this conversation today, I want to start with this question for our panelists. And it's this. I need you to paint the picture for us. Paint the picture, and while every picture may vary, how does poverty show up at your respective places? How does it show up at your door? And talk to us about what that actually looks like.
Okay, I'm happy to start. I'm at Jewish Family Services, and I will tell you about one of our clients, Tasha, who, and I want to preface this by saying, it really pains me when I hear people say people don't want to work, because that is not the experience that we have at Jewish Family Services. And we need to stop blaming and shaming people for experiencing poverty. Tasha is a great example of that. She was a single mom of 2 kids, was living in Northeast Ohio. She was doing jobs in janitorial work and call center. She decided she wanted to move to Columbus to be near her sister and have a support system. Unfortunately, not long after she arrived here, her sister died unexpectedly. So her support system was gone. She was using down her savings. Her car was repossessed. She was struggling to find food for her family and her children. She was at risk of becoming homeless, and she had to go on public benefits. It's not because she wanted that, it's just where she was in her life at that moment. But because she was on public benefits, she was referred to Jewish Family Services, where our staff leapt in. They helped her first stabilize so that she could have food for her family. They gave her Kroger cards, thank you, Kroger, for food. They helped her connect to food pantries. They helped her access low-cost internet and get a computer so she could work on job skills. They helped her with donations. We had donations of clothing for her kids and household needs, and then we worked with her on job skills. And then we spoke with one of our employer partners, Spectrum, who we've helped get 70 people into jobs this past year. And Spectrum didn't have a job that was right for her, but our team convinced them to interview her anyway. They were so blown away by Tasha that not only did they didn't offer her a job in customer services, they had her interview with their financial services, where she now has a job that pays $22 an hour. She has benefits, she's buying a car, and we're working with her to restore her credit so she can achieve her dream of getting a home.
Anybody else, feel free to jump in just for a moment, because I think sometimes we can have this picture that, as you mentioned, that it's just somebody that doesn't want to work, or maybe, it's the person who's up here and they just hit hard times, but we don't know about that. So somebody else give me another example and paint the picture for us of what that looks like, maybe from a different perspective.
Well, I think, is poverty a fact or a feeling? Obviously, this is a trick question. So I'm going to give you the fact and the feeling. So I grew up in public housing on welfare for 18 years. I grew up in the Sullivan Gardens housing projects. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that, but it was the roughest, the toughest, the baddest, the meanest, the most dangerous housing project. And when you grow up in this environment, right, what do you see? You see scarcity, right? Scarce role models, scarce resources, scarce opportunities. So that's your lens, right? So the fact there is that you grow up in this environment really of low expectations. Like she said, people think you don't want to work. The problem is so many things work against you. And then when you combine that, when you think about the permanent away uniform, obviously from a sports analogy, being a black or brown person, that's another dynamic really on top of that in terms of growing up in public housing. So when you grow up in this environment, it really messes with you, because not only is it a fact, it's a feeling, because it's physiological. And I always say, if you really want to understand poverty, you have to place your physiological self in someone's physical shoes. And that's where you have these vicarious experiences where you can understand. And I always say, you don't have to be Dr. Phil, but you need to feel what they need to feel. And that's really what poverty is about, because the feeling of poverty never escapes. That's why I'm involved in it. I grew up in that environment, and even going and playing basketball, you're still haunted by that. And I never want the stench of poverty to leave me, because then I'm going to be disconnected from the people that I'm called to serve. I have something in my pocket. My wife's here. She's from Chillicothe, Ohio. I don't know how many of you have been to Chillicothe. It's like going back in time when you go down there. You're like, wow, where am I? But she grew up in the middle class. I grew up in generational poverty, and there's a mindset, because we think of poverty in terms of just basically your position, but there's generational, 2 or more generations. I talk about this in my book. There's situational, where you move down to poverty because of some triggering event, and there's functional, where you behave as though you're poor, even though you're not technically poor. So, for example, people who grew up in the Depression, even though a lot of them are not poor anymore, because of what they went through, they can never enjoy life. So poverty, you're either going to be frivolous or frugal when you come out of it. So when you think about this feeling, it's hard to get away. That's why it's so hard. I know I've worked with the Urban League. You can give people these opportunities, but the problem is, because poverty, the feeling of it, particularly when it comes to it overwhelms your system and you're so reactive, it's very difficult to get away from that. So I think for a lot of people, it's not only giving them a plan, you also got to give them a playbook to deal with their emotionalism, because I think that's what trips up a lot of people.
And that's good. I'm glad that you actually mentioned that and you started to break that down, simply because when we think about the mindset, how have you all helped people to work through either breaking that down, developing new habits, or even developing something new for them that really helps them to be propelled forward from what they've known?
You know, I would say that this is about access and exposure. And so I want to put something in the context to just build off of what Lawrence just talked about. So yesterday there was an article, Forbes recognized Columbus as one of the fastest growing cities. And it's a fast and growing city because of one of the reasons why they thought it was one of the fastest growing cities and best places to be, because of its diversity. But then a couple of weeks ago from the Brookings Institute, they talked about, even though we've added jobs and the unemployment rates fell, the Columbus area ranked among the worst for racial inclusion, 51% of the poverty race gap, and 52nd for the employment gap. So I share that to say that one of the things that we have to also understand and still be mindful of is the racial equity gap that exists in this city and across this country. And that structural racism is still alive and well, whether we want to admit it or not. And so when you start talking about poverty, especially with certain populations, what you're talking about is oppression. And that oppression does have a psychological and mental impact on people who are in poverty or are feeling that they are oppressed. And what folks don't understand, especially with our children in particular, you know, when the George Floyd event happened and our black boys and girls had an opportunity to actually see something like that happen, folks don't really understand the mental and the psychological impact that that had on a lot of our black and brown babies. And so, to what Lawrence is saying, that a cycle then starts. And until we begin to start dealing with the fact that we have that racial equity gap, that there is oppression that still exists in this community, and Danielle Tong is here today, that our black babies are dying at a rate larger rate than what anybody else knows probably in this room, that black women are the fastest growing population, homeless population, and their children. Until we begin to understand a lot of those things, then even though we're up here having this conversation about poverty, it's what are we going to actually do as a community to actually deal with that. And so I also want to talk a little bit about what poverty looks like at the Urban League. We have to also start looking at our reentry population. And that's one of the populations that people don't want to deal with. So we had, and this is not just black, but this is also white. We had an expungement clinic at the Columbus Urban League probably about 3 weeks ago. And there was a white female who came in who was a nurse. Now these are reentry. People are trying to get their records expunged. And this woman had experienced the fact that a teacher had assaulted her child at school. And she went to the school and she assaulted the teacher, all right? So now she's a convicted felon. She cannot get a job, right? She's living in poverty. She doesn't have housing, right? She can't feed her kid. And so what we are now working with is how do we get her back on her feet, get her record expunged so that she can go back to being in the middle class. So this is one of those situational poverty pieces that you talked about. So we have to start looking at, for us, that's what we look at, and that's just one example, and I know Karen and Tony, we can all talk about it, but those are the kinds of things that we've got to start looking at. When you look at convicted felons, you can be a convicted felon if you don't pay your child support. So if you don't pay your child support, right, then you can't get, and you become a convicted felon, then you can't get a job. So how in the heck are we going to be able to pay our child support if we can't get a job? So it's this crazy cycle that puts people in poverty, and we've got to figure out a way how to get them out of it.
President Hightower, I think, thank you for raising and continuing to champion the idea that we need to keep talking about the structural racism that is in place and has been in place and the impact that it has on poverty specifically, but across the board, all the pieces. Thank you. And that Brookings Institute study, I just heard Kenny McDonald of the Columbus Partnership speak to that study this morning. We were actually, I think, 54th out of 54 in terms of our ability to include everyone. That's a challenge. When it comes to how it shows up, right, I think that it's important for us to understand it's not just one story. It's not just that one image that sometimes gets put across the TV screen or on our social media feed. It comes across all different ways, and the 13 Ys that we have in the neighborhoods and the communities we serve. And I think the way to address it is, first and foremost, having folks and organizations and individuals who lead in the community that provide that safe space, that connected resource to help and be there. We have a program that we connect families with, our Stable Families program. It's in partnership with the Seymour Institute and the United Way. We're very thankful for those partnerships. It is a year-long program, and that's what I wanted to get to, is the fact that it is not a one and done. It is not a, hey, we're going to get this one program out there, this one initiative. It is a year-long plan to help in multiple areas, because it's just not going to be one solution. You have multiple folks coming in from multiple different paths and backgrounds. You have to have a path and a plan that connects them to multiple resources.
Thank you for sharing that, and even the trickle-down effect. I want to dig into something, and then we're going to come back to solutions. And this is when we start to think about the core systemic issues that are really at the baseline of all of this. What comes to mind? What are the core systemic issues that help to attribute to this issue of poverty?
I think when you think about poverty, it comes down to the opportunity divide. I know when we start talking about race, people get a little nervous about this, but let me, since I know a lot of you probably like various sports, obviously we have the Olympics coming up. I talked to Stephanie, I know we have a legend in our midst here. My two favorite sports are swimming and track and field when I watch the Olympics. So I want you to think about this statement right here. Our lane assignment at birth often dictates and determines our life outcomes on earth. Let me say that again. Our lane assignment at birth often dictates and determines our life outcomes on earth. So all of you English fans out there, language arts, you know that adverb often is what makes that statement for probably a lot of you true. Because when you are in a certain lane, let's say in poverty, generational poverty, you're running in lane 1 and 8. I had a conversation with Butch Reynolds about this, and I said, Butch, tell me about the race. He says, look, no matter what lane I'm in, I run my race. He says, but there's a mentality you have to have depending on what lane you're in. So when you're in lane 1, you see everybody in front of you. So when you're poor, you think, I can't make this. Everybody's in front of me. There's no way I'm going to be able to catch up to them. So you just throw in the towel. When you're in lane 8, you feel all the heat coming behind you, and then when you come around that turn, you realize that, man, I'm in a tough situation here. But then you think about 2 and 7 and 3 and 6. That's the middle class, the struggling class and the middle class. And those who are affluent, it's lane 4 and 5. All of the attention is geared around lane 4 and 5 because that's where the race. And your time is either going to call you up, it's going to call you out. Call you up to a better place or call you out of a bitter space. My daughter's a swimmer at Ohio State. I'll end with this. She's the only African-American on the team out of 75 swimmers. Talking about diversity and opportunity, right? We've got to do better across the board in a lot of things. And it comes down to exposure, of course, and experience and expectations. But she said to me, she said, Daddy, I always want to swim in lanes 4 and 5. I said, why is that? She says, because I can exert my impact with the waves on the other lanes. And I can push the waves on the outside. She says, I never want to swim in lane 1 and 8 because not only do you have to deal with the waves coming on the inside, you got to deal with the waves coming off the wall. So we talking about internal and external pressures. And then you think about this black and brown uniform, and people say, oh, you know, you come over here from another country. And I say, well, wait a minute. You have to think structurally what has happened in this country, and then you combine that. Anybody who's into genetics understands you have genetics and epigenetics. Genetics, 3 or 4 generations. There's a Bible verse that says the sins of the father are passed to the 3rd or 4th generation. But they're finding out that epigenetics, environmental, can be passed forward 13 or 14 generations. That you still feel the effects of it, even though you're not in it, even though you're family and all of that. So when people say, well, just get over it, how can you get over something that's embedded in your DNA?
Don't ever put me on a panel with him again. So I want to build off of what Tony just talked about. When we talk about year-round programs or year-long program, I think a lot of times, and I know there's funders in the room, and you know I love y'all very, very much, and I appreciate all the investments that you make. But it's what Tony said, you cannot do a 6-week, a 10-week program with young people and actually think that that's going to make a difference based upon what Lawrence just talked about, of that poverty being embedded in you. And so let me say thank you to the Franklin County Commissioners and Director Bivens for funding us for a year-round program for young people. And it's a workforce readiness program. So we get them for the summer. But what we've now done is they've given us funding and made an investment for us to have them year-round, so that we're touching them at least once a month, and we're exposing them to opportunities, which I hope a lot of you will maybe be employer partners, because you have to expose our young people to the question that you just raised. How do we begin to move them out of poverty? And it's not just the children, it's also the parent. You cannot just leave the parent out of the equation when you're exposing your kids. If you say, oh, I went to Nationwide Arena and I, saw this concert today. And if the parent has never been to Nationwide Arena, or the parent's never been to an OSU football game, they cannot relate to what their child is saying. And so we also have to make sure that the parents are being exposed as well, because believe it or not, they probably haven't had that exposure either, and so that's where that generational poverty comes. So we gotta do better with our programming. Can't just be a one and done. It's gotta be something that is ongoing. We have to have dollars to make sure we can continue. I hate the word case manage, but to be able to manage people as they're going through the journey, because at the Urban League, we say that poverty is a series of crises. It's not just one. If I wake up, I have a new job, and if I don't have enough money to get a tire fixed, that sets me back. I lose my job. If I can't get my kids to daycare, or the daycare worker decides they're not going to take my kids and I can't go to work, that's going to cost me my job. And so that's why it becomes a series of different crises that go on that keeps people in generational poverty.
I'd like to follow up on something Stephanie just said. She used the F word, funding. And you see in front of you a group of people who do incredibly impactful work. And we are just a small part of our sector that does incredibly impactful work. But our sector, the human service sector, is extremely under-resourced for the impact that we have. Funding for our sector has not kept up the pace of our region's growth or the cost of living increases, and that is only going to be exacerbated with the growth that we see coming. So this community needs the work that we do. The ROI is unbelievable. When I think about just on our workforce services, last year at Jewish Family Services, we helped 630 people get new and better jobs, and that paid wages that generated $28.5 million in 1 year. That was on $2 million of investment in our workforce programs. So that ROI is off the charts, and we are not These folks sitting up here, we're not just do-gooders, we are economic engines for this community.
With that being said, what do you all feel like is the future of Ohio when we start to look at the disparities, when we start to look at issues with funding, all of these little things that are in play here? What do you see as the future of Ohio with that in mind? And I'll throw this other piece out here. Is guaranteed income something that is a possible solution?
You know, I think Ohio has a bright future. And one of the reasons why we have a bright future is because we have people like all of you in the room and the people that are streaming live that are here to hear these kinds of conversations. And what we have to do is we have to keep people like us, we have to keep our foot on the gas pedal, right? And we can't be afraid to have these conversations. And I think more and more folks are okay with having people like me in the room to be able to talk about structural racism and to be able to give them different antidotes and solutions. It's not just coming to the table and fussing about it. I wanted to say something else. But it's really about bringing solutions to the table. So case in point, we went out and earlier this year, we did a survey because we knew Intel was coming to town and Amgen and all these jobs in advanced manufacturing in the healthcare industry. And we did a survey and we put it out there and we had 3,500 people, believe it or not, they responded to the survey. So we had a great sampling. And what we wanted to ask minorities and people of color and underrepresented groups, we wanted to ask them, what would it take for you to get one of these jobs of the future? And going back to, I think it was what Kieran said, one of the things we found out is people said they want to work. They want those jobs, but they don't even understand how they can go out there and get a $100,000 job. Or if they want to be upskilled, they don't have the money to quit their job right now. And most of the respondents, most of them were full-time people, but they're making, or they're probably low-wage earners. They want to become high-wage earners, but they don't even know. And so this goes back to what I was saying about exposure. One of the things we're getting ready to do is to create a concept called the Career Connect Hub. Because what we've got to do is we've got to explain to people what the jobs are first, right? Then we got to have exploration for them so that they can know. So we'll be taking buses out to Intel and looking at that big hole in the ground and going out to Amgen so they can actually see what the bunny suits look like if you've got to go to work. Then we come back and then we're going to say, okay, now you know here are these options, either in healthcare or advanced manufacturing or engineering, technology. Do you fit into one of those? And then we're going to help you figure out how we can get you at a Columbus State, how we can get you funding, right, so that you can go to school. And we're going to continue to make sure that we're case managing you as you go through so that you can make it through. And then we're going to guarantee and make sure you have guaranteed employment. But those are the kinds of ideas we got to be able to bring to the table. And believe it or not, folks are letting me come to the table that at least let's talk about them. So we do have a future because we are talking about it.
I want to jump on that. I think that's the key piece. We're talking about it. I feel like in the recent times, we're talking about systematic failures, systematic barriers more than we ever have. We talked about the systematic failure, the systematic impacts of racism. We talk about the systematic impacts of childcare and the lack of access to childcare and what that does to families who want to get a job, who want to be gainfully employed, who want to upskill themselves, but don't have and can't afford affordable, high-quality, accessible childcare, right? So we're talking about that. We got a challenge statewide. It's a broken business model. We talked about this a few months ago in one of the other panels. We need to address those types of situations. And going back to this point about this is a long-term process. We are thankful for the partners, the Columbus Foundation, the United Way, the Seymour Institute, for helping to see that these are long-term visions. We can't one and done this, and they have to be those comprehensive solutions that address each of those factors. Again, I'll go back to our Stable Families program where we're sitting down, our coordinators are sitting down with families on their space, on their grounds, and talking to them and say, what are your barriers? Is it your economic security? Are you having challenge with, it could be a rent payment, maintaining your stable house? Is it your child care? How can we connect you to affordable? It's not just one thing. It's got to be connected to multiple pieces and parts. So I am optimistic. We have great things going on here in Central Ohio. We have a room full of people and a community full of people that want solutions, and we're talking about them more, which helps us get closer. The key is the funding piece. We have to keep coming back to this is a long-term solution.
As you all have listened to what they've said, I'm curious now as to the people that you've worked with, a number of people. As I was Googling all of you, you've worked with thousands of people, but when you start to look at the success of the people that you have worked with, how have you helped them to overcome their challenges? How have you weeded through the challenges? And then how have some of them been able to pay it forward?
I'll give an example that's not just about helping people, but it also speaks to the success and where we are as a community. And that's about working with employers. Part of the people that we work very closely with are employers, and the state of our current economy and the low unemployment rate has meant that employers are a lot more willing to now consider hiring from talent pools that they might not have considered before, that are too often hidden to them. So that might be people of color. It's people who are foreign born. And we're having a lot of success right now working with employers to help them recruit from more diverse talent pools. We do cultural competency trainings so that they understand the needs of the people they're hiring. We provide training, and then a lot of retention supports, a lot of troubleshooting. I know if you're here next week, you're going to be hearing about immigrants in the community. That's one of the major populations that we serve, is refugees and immigrants. And we have a lot of success working with employers who hadn't ever thought about hiring from an immigrant community before. We've got a new budding partnership with Superior Group that does electrical contracting. They were struggling to hire entry-level positions. And so we convinced them to give a try to a couple of our clients who recently came here from Afghanistan. They had some relevant experience. They did not speak any English or very little English. And they decided they would give it a shot. Our team went in, learned about the job, actually worked alongside the new hires for a while, have done a lot of troubleshooting, a lot of cultural competency training, but this is getting people into jobs. This is skilled labor. They started at $17 an hour with fully paid benefits and union membership, and 2 months into the job, they're now earning $20 an hour. 5 years in, they will be certified electrical contractors and have all kinds of opportunities. So finding employers who are really willing to work with us to access the talent, that is what we are going to need to be successful as a region with the job growth that we're seeing and predicting.
You know, I know there are a lot of faces here, particularly white men in positions of power, privilege, and prominence. And let me say that, you know, I always say, and I work with a lot of companies. I did a presentation for Schottenstein Realty Group, and they said, I really appreciate where you came from because you were fair, even though you held us accountable. And I always talk about white men in positions of power, privilege, and prominence. I always say, you don't have to sit down, you just need to scoot over. There has to be enough room at the opportunity table or the wheel for others. Now, it's going to be a tight fit. It's going to be uncomfortable. You're not going to know the person, but you got to get comfortable being uncomfortable in order to grow, as my wife likes to say. So I think we need to really educate people, because it's not just taking people out of poverty, showing them what's better. If you're from an affluent neighborhood or background, come and see what it's like to be poor, right? So I think it goes both ways in terms of helping people. There was a young man that said to me, he said, Lawrence, he said, Mr. Fundy, you know, you can't expect me to change. I've been this way and gone through this for 18 years to change in eight weeks, because we do have to have the resources. And it's not enough just to expose them. One of the things we do with our youth organization, we spend a lot of money on our young people, but we also give them stock in publicly traded companies. Because, see, it's not just about giving them a job, right? Because you have to first transform their legacy if you want to change their life. So let's work with the back in mind first and then start from there, because we've got to really do this. I really see myself as a modern-day Robin Hood, right? But I don't steal from the rich and give to the poor. What I do is I borrow from the wealthy to empower the less fortunate. And I think we've got to really change this. Thank you. we've got to change this whole dynamic in terms of how we going about this, right? When you see people coming there, and it's not just people who've been incarcerated, what about people who can't get away from their drug addictions, right? I'm a former drug addict, right? So people are surprised when I tell that. I know what it's like, right, to not be able to get away from a certain drug, right? But I always say if you got a drug problem, there's a dysfunction and then there's a deficiency that you have to address. So a lot of them can't even pass the drug test. Now some companies are waiving their drug tests. So there's a lot of underlying issues that we have to deal with. The trauma, the ACEs, adverse childhood experience. We got a lot of different things. People think poverty is really simplistic. It's very complicated and complex. And a lot of times people look at these A, B, C solutions. It's not that easy. So we have to take a holistic approach, right? Not just professionally, nutritionally, relationally, educationally, spiritually. You got to cover all these bases if we really want to get people. If we think we're going to recruit people from outside this country to really move this country forward, we're mistaken. We got to deal with Pookie and Ray Ray and them, Shamika and Peaches. We got to deal with Johnny Bob and Nancy Lou. Well, come on now. We got to really help all people. Right? So we got to do a better job. And it's not just black and brown. My wife's from Chillicothe, Ohio, Appalachia, right? They're left behind as well. They assumed that their white skin would give them a benefit, and they're behind as well. So if Ohio's open for business, not only where the jobs, where's the business of making it your business to help everybody in the state?
So success for the Columbus Urban League, I'll give you one of our programs is financial empowerment. And under that, we do home buyer education. And believe it or not, in the first quarter of this year, we had 66 participants that came through our home buyer education course. And we had 9 of them that closed on new homes, equaling about $2 million put back into the community. So these are the kinds of things that are doable if you take the time and if we expose people and help them understand the importance of financial literacy in the black community.
One of those 66 people was one of our clients that we referred to Urban Lake, who had participated in our Financial Empowerment Center, which is a city service that's free to anybody, and it offers one-on-one financial counseling. So we helped that individual get her house in order, no pun intended, and then off to Stephanie to really figure out how she could move forward toward buying a house. And so one thing this is really important work around financial empowerment and financial literacy, and we wait way too long to do it. One of our clients who's a certified financial counselor said, people are disconnected from their money. Financial literacy is a poverty prevention strategy. And it's something that we need to do with our young people. We need to start it much, much sooner so that people have an understanding of credit and debt and savings and investments.
Thank you for sharing that. We are going to pause for a moment, and we're going to start taking questions. So for those of you that have thought of questions in your mind while you've been sitting here, you have an opportunity here in the room and, of course, online. If you've got a question, you can go straight to the back and go to the podium where you can line up for those questions to be asked and answered. Also, if you are online, please feel free to drop your question in the chat. So with that being said, I want to turn it over really quickly to Doug Buchanan.
Tonisha, thank you, and thank you to today's panelists. If you do have a question and you're in the room here, as Tonisha said, please do join me here at the microphone. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. If you are watching online, please do type your questions into the chat. Keep in mind that great questions at the Metropolitan Club have 2 things in common. They take less than 30 seconds to ask, and they end with a question mark. So here is our first one to get us started. The current U.S. minimum wage of $7.25 is now worth 40% less than it was in 1970. The U.S. minimum wage is worth less than at any time since February 1956. What impact would tying the minimum wage to inflation have on the poverty cycle?
You know, that's a great question, because it's not just about inflation. It's really giving people not just a livable wage, but a dignified wage. Because you got to be able to earn. And obviously, when it comes to housing, we didn't even talk about it a little bit. We mentioned about housing security or insecurity, but it's a big issue, right? Because, you know, obviously, we know it costs more, particularly over the last few years. Look at everything. You go to the grocery store, the gas station, I mean, all of these different things. So we've got to find a way. But then you got different cities and municipalities and states where the cost of living is even more than that. So I think we need to really look at that, and each state needs to take a hands-on approach on how we can actually bridge the gap, because obviously the minimum wage is not enough to actually help some people get through their difficulties.
I would just jump in on that one real quick. Is one of the things that's striking to me, and any one of the nonprofits represented in this room could speak to this point as well as we could at the Y. I know you would both agree with me, is that the striking number of people that work on our teams, in our navigator roles, in our caseworker roles, you name the organization, the position, that qualify for assistance. Right? To do this work, to support and lift up the community, costs, the wages needed to be able to support their families aren't even there. And that's, I think that sends a strong message that we do need to address the wage issue.
I would just like to echo that, and I'm not, I'm sharing this information, but one of our team members drove us over here today, and I think that, we've made sure that we're at least at $55,000 a year for our entry level, because to that point, people cannot live off of just even off of 55. And so, right now when we're going to funders, and we are putting the minimum of 55 down for wages. But this person that drove us over here, we were talking in the car, and to your point, has to drive Uber as well as working at the Urban League. So a lot of our folks have second jobs. And then we expect them to work 10 and 12 hours a day. And then and then their families. So, inflation is real, and our folks are feeling it, and especially around this housing piece too. We've got to figure out what workforce housing looks like for folks who work in the human services arena, because they probably need it quicker and faster than anybody else.
Thank you. Richard Needles, watching on the live stream, asks, what impact would the permanent expansion of the child tax credit have on breaking the poverty cycle? Is this on the radar for 2024?
It would be huge, and trust me, we all saw the benefits of having it for individuals and families to be able to make sure that their children were being taken care of. We've got to figure out how this can no longer continue to be a political or partisan issue. It's got to become something that everybody agrees to and has an understanding of it.
And how those tax credits actually can segue into tax refunds as well. So I think to get more money in your pocket as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We have seen, I think one of the benefits of the pandemic was we saw some things that worked. So we know some of the ways, we have to have the will.
With that being said, as well, we saw the poverty rates, even for kids, be cut way down. And then when they ended, then they went back up. So it speaks volumes about how much it's needed. Next question.
I had to get hugs, I'm sorry. I believe, based on what I've heard today, in my experience, we have not addressed the elephant in the room, only the first lane and the 8th lane, and people born into poverty. We haven't addressed our school issue, education. I talked to the gentleman from Kroger, says, yeah, I need mechanical engineers, but people can't do it. What are we going to do to our state government so that they fund education equally? Here in Columbus, I'm personally tired of tax increases, and the schools aren't performing any better. So how can we help and do something about that?
Vote. Get out to vote. That's our superpower today. We've got to get out to vote. We have too many people that are not voting because they don't feel like whatever they're voting or who they're voting for is representing them. But we now see the implications for when folks don't vote. And in particular, as you're talking about the new school board tax levy that was voted on last year. It's amazing now how many people didn't get out to vote. Their taxes now have doubled, and now everybody's complaining, but you didn't get out to vote.
Let me just say with education, obviously playing sports, most people know me as a sports person, but I've always cared more about education than I ever did about sports. Took days off on the basketball court, but never in the classroom. And we've got to have our kids prioritize education, but it needs to be fun, and more importantly, it needs to be relevant. So kids need to see, because a lot of kids want to be a professional athlete, or they want to be a rapper or entertainer. As we just said, we have to expose kids to something bigger and better, right? Not everybody, I don't know if anybody else has played professional sports, but I tore my body up playing sports, surgeries and different things. Why not use your mind and make just as much money? But kids don't know what's available if they haven't been shown that. So when you talk about where we are in terms of education, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, in terms of STEAM, we got to take kids out of their environment. That means businesses need to open their doors and show kids what's available. Talk about the jobs, talk about not only the income, but talk about the process that you need to be able to get these jobs. So we got a lot of things because we're focused on English and math and all of that, but nobody ever talks to our kids about, we get a job, but what to do with your money. Right? Where's this? It's kind of backward logic here. So we have to expose kids to really what's available, which means we've got to broaden what it means at education. I always say, even when you're not in class, you're always in school. And even if you're not in school, you always need to have some type of class. I think our kids need a different type of education to supplement what they're getting in the classroom. And that's really where we come into play. But I think it has to be even in the school system, they've got to carve out some time as well during the day to be able to give these kids something more, because a lot of these kids don't even know how talented they are until people start telling them and start exposing them, and then their mind, and then they say, oh, I can do that? Yes, you can do that. You don't have to be a basketball player or an athlete or a rapper or somebody like that just to be successful in this life. Most people in my neighborhood didn't tear up their body playing a sport.
Speaking of different kinds of education, one thing we haven't touched on yet today is digital education, digital equity. That is another area where our community, where the inequities exist. It all existed pre-pandemic. The pandemic really brought it into the fore. And we're lucky to have a community that is in the forefront of addressing digital inclusion. I know we have some of our friends from Smart Columbus here today who are leading the Franklin County Digital Equity Coalition, where we're working on helping people access low-cost internet, technology, digital skills training. There isn't a job right now that doesn't require digital skills. And so we know that is an important element of education that we need to address. There's an equity part of it. And another thing that we haven't talked about today that really has to do with poverty as well is the impact on older adults. Digital inclusion is part of that. If you want to be part of society right now, you need to be in the digital age to access health care, to pay your bills, to connect with loved ones. I mean, that is a critical skill that we need across the board at all ages.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think it's a yes and. Yes, we need to address our school system, our school funding issue. It's been unconstitutional for years. We all know that in the state of Ohio. Yes, and we need to continue to do the work that we're doing to wrap around our community and our families. Our program, our programs, our multi-generational approach, whether we're dealing with a senior in their home and helping them be successful, or with our stable family program where we're sitting down with the family and we're talking about the success of the child academically, what do they need to advance and continue to move forward, or with the family from an economic standpoint, all to continue to keep their home stable so that they can continue to have the growth that they need as a family. So I think it's a yes and.
Next question.
Thank you. Nancy Nanny asks, like the U.S., Canada is also a multicultural country. How are they impacted by poverty? Is poverty being effectively addressed in Canada, and are there lessons that we can learn from them?
They have a very different healthcare system than we have, but I am not the expert on that.
Next question.
You spoke a lot about the importance of holistic and connected care for people experiencing poverty. Can you talk a little bit about the barriers or challenges that organizations face in providing that connected and holistic care? And then also, are there ideas that you have or suggestions for mitigating those barriers?
You know, one of the things that I have to, unapologetically say this, is we understand that cultural competency at the Columbus Urban League is very important. And so a lot of times we need to partner with other entities because we know that Black experiences are different from Latina experiences, are different from Appalachian experiences. And so everybody doesn't have that cultural competency in their organizations. And so at the Columbus Urban League, we try to maintain the holistic approach, but finding the right partners is really, really important. You have to have somebody that sometimes has that same lived experience that you have, that they understand that they're coming into a non-judgment zone when they're talking about their issues. And so that also becomes a barrier. One of the things that we found when we did the survey was that folks, the people who did respond to the survey said, we will come to the Columbus Urban League if you offer the program in order to get us connected, because they're not comfortable going out to another organization or possibly a majority organization that doesn't have the cultural competency to help them feel that they can navigate this in a successful way, in a non-judgment way. So that's part of the reality that we have to, that as a community, we have to talk about that. Everybody, some people, they mean well, organizations mean well, but if you don't have that cultural competency to deal with what's coming into the room, or who you're talking to, how you talk to people. And I'll give you an example of this just from even being a Black middle-aged woman. So I'm in the hair salon a couple of months ago, and my OBGYN, who is Black, I hadn't seen her for many, many, many years. And so I begged her, can you please take me back, right? Because I'm at a stage in my life, I want to be with a Black woman, right? This week is Black Maternal Health Week, for those of you that don't know that. And one of the things that a lot of Black mothers talk about who have maternal health issues is that doctors aren't listening to them, that they're Black and they have different issues and that white doctors can't hear them, male or female. And so I'm begging her, can I please come back? Can I please come back? And so there's probably about 6 other women that are in the beauty salon. And so she said, okay, I'll take you back, but I'm not taking any more patients right now. All 6 of those other women were like, I gotta go, I want you to take me. And they all said, because they too were looking for a Black gynecologist. And we don't have enough. So it's not that folks, that this is about racism. This is about people going to services and having services by and from people who look like them, who understand them. And in the human services arena, we know that that's also a fact. People want to come and deal with people that they know are going to have their best interest in mind.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more about that, the issue of cultural competency, and it's why our organizations have very diverse staffs that reflect the people that we serve. You know, that's essential to be able to do the work. And the other thing that Stephanie mentioned that I'll add real quickly is partnership. To be able to provide those kind of holistic services, none of us can do it alone. And it's why we partner all the time among ourselves and among many of the organizations that I see out here in the room today.
We have about 3 minutes left for a final question.
All right, how's everybody doing today? So my name is Jamora Green. I'm a supervisor for the YMCA Stable Families Program. You know, we work with families on stability and transition and self-sufficiency. I wanted to ask, you know, we promote families to increase their income, but we struggle with encouraging families to chase career opportunities because of the type of positions that are located on the outskirts of Central Ohio. So in result, they kind of settle for being part-time opportunities. And so I just want to kind of address the transportation barrier. And do y'all have anything for that?
There's going to be a ballot issue in the fall, Link Us. And I strongly suggest that as a community, we have to begin socializing this in the community. We need to be talking about it because these new transportation hubs are going to be able to take people from the core city out to these jobs. So it's not just going to be Link Us, it's also going to be other transportation issues and solutions that we're going to have to come up with. But this is going to be a start, and so Link Us is a really important piece that we need to get out and vote for this coming fall.
All right, we are out of time, everybody. This is definitely a conversation that can go on and on. I want to ask this final question of panelists. What is your message, one, to the person who is currently living in poverty? And then what is your message to legislators right now?
I would say, number one, there are organizations in the community that are networked throughout a web so that there is accessibility to our organizations, to our folks that can help, that can connect, whether if it's to our programs or to a collaborator that we can connect them with to help them. That's the number one piece. And then the legislative piece, we need legislation that addresses the systematic issues. The systematic issues in housing, the systematic issues in childcare access, those types of things that are going to make permanent change.
I would say to the legislators, come listen to your people. Come and talk to your people. I think that's really important as they begin to come up with legislation and how they create it and what they're voting on. And then to any individual who is in poverty, I would say, don't be afraid to come and ask. We have to make people feel comfortable to be able to come and ask. And know that there are places like those of us that are sitting up here and organizations like ours that when you walk in the door, you don't have to worry about asking because we're going to make sure that we kind of help you figure it out.
I agree so much with that. I want people to know that when they walk through our doors, they'll be treated with dignity and they'll be empowered to set goals and then supported to work toward achieving those goals. And I'll just echo for legislators too, I want them to invest in what works.
And I would say that to the legislators, not just listening to your constituents, but you got to know who they are and understand them. Yes, I'm putting a plug on my book, but let me leave with this, right? If it takes a village to raise a child, then it requires a community to repair a broken soul. A lot of people are broken, and it's our responsibility to help them to be that community. The village has been blown up. We got to be a community and include all people, whether you look, think, or act like us. We need you on our team. Thank you, and God bless.
All right. This has been a really good conversation, and I want to turn it over back to Ellen Block.
I hope everyone today found today's forum inspiring and motivating and gives you something to think about with your vote, your dollar, your time. We want to thank our sponsors for today's forum, Croker, and our host, the Ellis. We are also grateful to the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and to our live stream partner, the Columbus Dispatch, and a very special appreciation to today's speakers, Tony Collins, Lawrence Funderburke, Stephanie Hightower, Karen Mozenter, and our host, Tonisha Johnson. Please make plans now to attend next Wednesday's forum, How Immigrants Revitalize Communities, featuring more passionate Columbus leaders that you'll want to meet. Also, please don't forget that copies of Lawrence's book are available for sale by the exit. Thank you again, everyone. We could not do this without you. Have a great afternoon.